Good evening and welcome to the Monday, February 4, 2013 special meeting of the Board of Education. There are two items on the agenda, I believe, for tonight, but the first is to review and take action on a proposed budget to forward to the Board of Finance for its consideration, and then from the Board of Finance to the town meeting and to the town at referendum. We held a couple of nights of hearings last week. I think it's a fair summary of those meetings to say that the members of the public who spoke, I think, were gratified by some of the new programs that Dr. Freeman has proposed in the budget, and I think also wasn't expressed it wasn't expressly stated, but I think people appreciated that at the relatively modest increase in the budget that at least Dr. Freeman put forward. I think that really I think the message that we took out of the hearings last week is that this is an exciting budget in many ways, because we've managed to get under control a couple of the things that have been really vexing us for many, many years: health insurance, health benefits costs for one, and then also the salaries line was very responsible, very reasonable last year. I think a combination of retirements and some reasonable contracts. But I think one of our directions to Dr. Freeman in preparing the budget was to continue to figure out about the special education outplacement issue. That, I think it's fair to say, is the largest unresolved issue, one that we'd like to try to make some progress on. And Dr. Freeman, I think, has made some recommendations that will enable us to build capacity in district and try to get that under control and provide good services at a this is one of these arguably unusual situations in government, in that the better services may be able to be delivered for less money. Better services educationally, and better services from what we heard from the parents that are using the Bright Connections program, for example, the autism program at Guilford Lake School. So, but we do have a tradition here in Guilford of reviewing the superintendent's budget carefully and making sure that we believe that it's responsible and reasonable and something that the Board of Finance and the town will get behind. And so we have Dr. Freeman's proposal. I think that it's fair to say that when we talked last week, there were some issues that we had questions about, and some items in the budget that maybe we were more enthusiastic about, and some that we were not quite as enthusiastic about. So I wonder if you've taken any based on where the comments were by the board last week, have you got any alternatives to present to us?
We did, and I wanted to share those with you now. We went back at the end of what I thought were three very rich, productive conversations with the leadership team following the public hearings, and put together my takeaway from those conversations and where I felt we ended the discussion on Tuesday. I want to start by saying that it's a position in which I'm very comfortable. I continue to believe that should we make the changes to the proposed budget that we have here, that it continues to position us very well to move forward, that it continues to be a forward-looking, not a status quo budget, and that it supports the three pillars that we've been talking about in our presentations with you. It allows us to move forward and work on that special education topic to develop the capacity to keep more of our students in our home district and to educate a greater percentage of our students in our home district here in Guilford, which I agree is better for the students and should be an efficiency in our budget. It allows us to implement the new expectations and requirements around evaluation next year for both teachers and administrators. And most importantly, and in fact I think underpinning both of those, it allows us to continue the work that we've been doing with the implementation of the Common Core state standards. So what we've done and what we've passed around to all of you shows several areas that I think we focused on at some length, some more than others. But we are suggesting that we reduce our proposed budget by $25,000 in the area of transportation. We had a lengthy and very positive meeting with representatives from STA. We met with the regional manager, we met with our local manager, and we met with one of the executives from the company to go over our contract. We're prepared to give you more detail about that renewal. But I'm confident suggesting that we can reduce the amount that we've budgeted for transportation next year by $25,000. We have reduced our proposed increase to the site improvement line. Our original budget suggested an increase of $100,000 to site improvement over our current year. We would suggest a $75,000 increase to site improvements, which still takes us to a threshold of approximately $500,000 annually that we think is a healthy number at this time. In response to some of the extended conversations, we have looked carefully at paraprofessionals. There was a suggested increase in this budget of 3 paraprofessionals, and I apologize for not highlighting that in my first presentation here in this room. I've met with Mrs. Brown, who started today, by the way, and is on the payroll as of this morning. We have gone over projections for next year. This is not to suggest that we don't recognize that we will need more paraprofessionals in the Bright Connections program next year, but we're committed to finding a way to work within the existing staffing. Dr. Johnson and Mrs. Brown are going to take a look at those levels of staffing. Mrs. Brown will be working closely with the building administrators, and we will find a way to work within the existing staffing levels for those paraprofessional positions. And while I do believe that the administrative position is going to be necessary, I think that an increase of half a position is a step in the right direction, and we can take small incremental steps. I do believe that adding half a position at the building level will help with the implementation of evaluations next year. It will help with the administration of the special ed programs that we're looking to build in-house. If it is enough help, then we will stop at that level, and if it turns out as we go through next year that we still require additional administrative support, we'll come back next year and continue to build on that position. I'm not sure exactly what that 50% will look like at this point, but we will work on restructuring that. If we make those adjustments to the budget that we have been discussing, you'll see how each one reduces the original administrative proposal. It will give us a year-over-year increase of $1,577,294, which would be reflected in a 2.98% increase in this budget. So that was my understanding of where we finished our previous conversations. I think that that is a good budget. I'm excited about moving forward with that budget, and I'm also looking forward to continuing conversation here tonight if there's more conversation about where this leaves us.
Folks have thoughts? What?
The approved budget last year, $52,913,000. I mean, effectively, we have not spent that budget the way it was supposed to be spent because of the large increase in tuition. So you can actually say that we were sort of under budget last year by a little bit, by about 194. And when we've always done budgeting, or I've always done budgeting, we always take a look at where we actually ended up in terms of how much we were going to spend, and then took the budget on top of that. Not based upon how much, we budgeted for the previous year, because things change, okay? Things that we don't have control over, which this happens to be one of them. And it's also a very large variable. So I would say that, and this is a different way of looking at things, but our new proposed budget isn't really 3.39%, but it's somewhere around 3% increase over what we've actually would have spent the budget money on, including that increase in special ed. Okay, so I'm, the fact that we're trying to get this sort of around the 3% mark, I would argue that this is the original budget was 3%. With that being said, the site improvements we've been trying to get up a little bit more. This year we're holding back and not doing a bunch of them, primarily because of this additional cost. We want to stay within budget, which I understand. But all that means is that more of it gets deferred into a later date, which means that we're not really upkeeping with the way we would hope to upkeep. We're actually pulling back again, which, as we know, over time is actually a very, has a very negative effect in terms of long term. The other concern that I have is that the special ed coordinator, we're looking to invest money into special ed. And the last thing I'd like to see is it be underfunded and all of a sudden fail because we don't have enough dollars associated in that program as we'd like to see. Okay, so those are kind of my 3 points. I understand the other ones. I like the fact that transportation is a good negotiated point, things of that nature. But I just hate to see us kind of dive too deep and not give you what you need in order to make these new programs a success, especially on the investment side. I've seen too many people underinvest in things and it just fails. So the money you've actually spent on it is no good anyway. So,
thank you.
Other thoughts? Why don't we just, everybody offer their views, and then I guess you can maybe address them. And I think probably one thing you ought to address is again, why no recommendation for all-day kindergarten? Because that was certainly one of the things parents spoke to us about.
I guess maybe to follow on John's comments, I think it's very reasonable if we can stick to it. And I'm just interested to see that you have a $25,000 reduction. I guess it's a reduction in the increase of $500,000 in the tuition line.
Yes.
But are you pretty confident that we can stay within that with the $25,000 reduction so that we don't end up cutting into the other things that we've already reduced, such as site improvements?
Fairly confident, I think, is a fair way to say it. Yes, every year special education has been budgeted on real anticipated costs, and we've overrun those costs. I think that it is a fair projection to say that we are expecting some return on the investments we're making. So it's a small amount in comparison to a $500,000 increase. So we're still increasing by $400,000 and $775,000. But I think it's a suggestion that we are expecting to see a return on the investments that we're making. We showed you the 5-year projection that we put together. We expect to net some of that. Yes, we are working to be prudent in how we spend monies like site improvements, but last week we did release $50,000 of what we're holding back in site improvements to Mr. Gurnham. We're looking at our end of the year as we get closer and closer and we feel better and better. The goal was for Mr. Gurnham to push projects to the end of the year and hopefully be able to roll some of that money out. But you're right, if we're holding back on that money to cover something else, we need to budget better in both of those areas. We need to spend the money that we budget into site improvements, and we need to live within the money that we budget into special education. I think one budget cycle, we're moving in that direction. In 2 budget cycles, 3 budget cycles, I'd like to sit here and say I'm very confident, rather than fairly confident, that we can do both of those things. But I think I feel a shift. I'm feeling more confident in one and more optimistic in the other. So I think we're shifting in the right direction. But I'm going to be cautious and conservative in what I project for next year immediately as we settle into these new working systems.
I guess I'd just like to hear, maybe you can wait till the end to answer all
Sure.
the things, but I mean, John's concern is that under investment in the local capacity will hinder your ability to start to bring some of those kids back in district. The other side of that, though, is that, a couple of years ago we heard that we could maybe even cut 2 coordinators. And I understand the pressure on the evaluations has increased sort of the need for some of the administration. But do you think the halftime FTE will be enough for you to, work towards the goals of building the local capacity?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
Wait till the end or answer now?
It's up to you.
I don't necessarily believe, the fact that we're putting in a special ed coordinator, I think is more of a shift of responsibilities than it is a full-time new person to do new work. Okay, and I think what really needs to be stressed is that, the work was still getting done. Okay, and the question is, it was being done by others because that had to get done. So the things that weren't getting done were maybe things that could be deferred again, and what might have they been? What could have they been? But right now, so to me, this is just a shift. So it's okay to put in a special ed coordinator because that's going to be their title, but their job's still going to be, it's still going to change the way other people are doing their job. So 3 or 4 other people now have other time to do what they're supposed to do, which I think is a different way of putting it, and I think it's a more accurate way. So.
Well, I was going to say, I support this now revised budget. I have to be mindful that we have an equation of revenue in the town, of revenue and expenditures. And our revenue this year is projected to be a negligible increase over last year, according to what we've been told by the Board of Finance, less than 1%. So I think we're coming out now with a very responsible budget that takes into account the Common Core state standards, it takes into account a major investment in special education in-house from 2 perspectives, at the high school and at the elementary school. with the long-term goal of trying to prevent outplacements. I don't think we're going to bring anybody back, or if we do, it would be a surprise. But I think we can, in the future, prevent further outplacements. At least that's what we've learned from the Simsbury experience. And also, at the same time, for the non-special ed students in our district, we're making two other investments. One in the coaches at the Baldwin Middle School, and the other with a increase in mathematics at Adams Middle School. So I think we're responding to both the town and the town's needs for being responsible and the taxpayers' needs to be responsible, and also for our needs as educators to approach our task responsibly, to invest money where we expect to see a big return, i.e. special ed, to invest money where we expect to see increased performance in the literacy and mathematics area. So all in all, I think this is a very responsible budget, and I'm prepared to vote yes as it now is amended.
Ms. Stein, Mr. Kazin?
I would like to hear a little bit more about reducing tuition by $25,000, just a little further explanation. I know we were at funding at about 75%. We're using a multiplier of 75%, so if you could just detail that a little further. And I'd also like to hear a little bit more, please, Dr. Freeman, about the thought process of having a special ed coordinator at all in the budget. We've had, on your original proposal, 1 FTE, and we've, under this proposal, reduced it to 0.5, and there certainly could be some logic to just reducing it to a 0 because we have a new special ed director coming on board, and wait and see how she wants to allocate resources. And as John said, it's a matter of, and you have provided some explanation of how we'll be utilizing that 0.5. I'd just like to hear a little bit more of an explanation.
Sure. Your thoughts?
Same concern about tuition. I wouldn't want us to be taking $25,000 out of tuition just to get our number under 3%. I also noticed that comparing the original requested amounts in the budget to the amount that you ultimately asked us for, we actually reduced tuition at that point by $150,000. So here's another $25,000 coming out. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Generally, though, I think I would echo the term Dr. Myers used, that I think this is responsible budget. And what I particularly like, in addition to the things you all pointed out, is that I think that this budget shows a step toward conquering the two areas of our budget that I think have been the financial weak spots, really. And one is the growth in the tuition line, and the other is the fact that we have not gotten the site improvement line up to where it should be. So we're taking positive steps on both those things, which I think is great.
Not to continue to echo what other people said, I guess when we were looking, Paul, at the list you gave us last week about possible cuts and looking at some of the other things that are on here that I think, if we support this budget, are going to be able to stay. I'm pretty excited. I'm excited about the literacy coaches. I think the elementary school teachers could not, elementary school principals could not say enough about about the literacy coaches in each of their schools. What a kind of a powerful and positive experience that was for their teachers and particularly for their students. And so to be able to kind of expand that into Baldwin, I think is very exciting, and I would love to see that stay. Kevin has asked for a technology integration specialist now for a second year in a row, and I think we're all in agreement that that's a really needed individual. So I think that's very exciting. You know, the math teacher at Adams. I mean, I'm really excited to see us not only tackling some of the areas in special ed that are clearly needing our attention, but to be able to also tackle some of these other areas that I think are going to make a significant impact in what we can offer all the kids in the district. in terms of some of these other pieces. So.
Your thoughts?
Sure, I'll share a couple. On the paras part in here, as I see that, that's reducing paras in the general utilization sense of things rather than in a particular program like Bright Connections. Is that an accurate way of reflecting?
We would find a way to absorb it over the entire distribution of paraprofessionals, not out of one program like Bright Connections.
Right. And in doing so, they would still be meeting the IEPs of the students that are required to take and do so.
We would have to find a way to meet all IEPs, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That said, where Bright Connections may need more support, if, for example, if you've got a higher number of students that then start enrolling in that, then that would offset what our expenses theoretically would be on the outside. I don't have a problem with replacing, our own employees for more expensive outside ones. And I'm making that assumption that if we move outside, then we're paying, 1.5, 2 to plus times more per hour for those same type of services. And things that are more specialized, you only need a few hours for. You got to recognize that you then may have to bring those in on a contract basis, but trying to build up that program. So that's one sense on the paras that I would reflect upon, that there could be an increased need, but it would solely be based upon enrollment in a program like Bright Connections that you would be saving on the other side, which can affect the tuition reflections that Gary in particular had, as we talked about. Two other areas I see that are several of us chatted, and I think it's on an ongoing basis of management rather than picking a number out of the budget, but it's the appropriate software integration approach to continue our process to improve our utilization of data with the power of access to it in sort of non-traditional ways is what this system is done. So, for example, using our accounting system and inputting at the local building levels their POs rather than generating paper copies on of other forms and so forth. In the special ed software that we just got this last year, make sure that that is also stepped up and that it's being utilized, appropriately, and you're not finding that somebody who's still not buying into it or doesn't have the training to buy into it, and you still got a sheet of paper somewhere that shouldn't exist in that way. And the other part of that is once we get those things in process, we can make better use of our administrators' time by having them being able to take and review at their desk POs and sign off, and accelerate the process and how many minutes it may take them to do that and go through a sheet of paper, et cetera, which gets down into freeing them up, hopefully, for the real meat of their job as opposed to having to be making other physical handing of papers for X amount of time. So in addition to what other people have said here and Sue's reflection in particular on the way in which we're trading off these things you've mentioned here and the good job to put together, those are my comments.
Thank you.
And I'll just make a quick comment and then turn it back over to you. I just want to refresh everybody's recollection that this is a $50-something million budget, and when we're talking about $25,000, that's a 20th%. So, it's a budget. In a budget, I guess I'm channeling Mr. Potocny in his absence. It's a budget. It's an estimate of where we think it's going to be. And you know what? We've always been, we're pretty good. We're pretty close at the end of the year, but these numbers are going to change. There's going to be somebody that moves into the district that we weren't expecting. There's going to be retirements that we didn't expect. The energy is not going to be exactly what we thought it was going to be. It's never going to be exactly what we think. This is an estimate, and is that, Ms. Trudeau, is that basically what Mr. Potocny would have said? It's an estimate, and if it may be that the special ed tuition line will be lower next year than we budget for. Now, it hasn't been lately, but it could be.
Yes.
It could be that staffing is lower because of retirements. It could be that energy is higher because prices have gone up. It could be that tuition is higher because this excess cost grant isn't renewed at the same amount we think it is. So it's sitting here now in February, we're talking about
right,
there are
it's
a
8
lot
months
of
away
things.
before you start to really start eating the dollars in September.
And 5 months before we know what the state's going to do.
Right.
which, you know,
Yeah,
so
but
anyway.
don't you think continuing to cut stuff out just leaves less opportunity to actually make budgets?
Well,
I mean, you really
Well,
think
sure.
the tuition's going to go down that much? And
well-
if it is, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to put the money in the site improvements and just take it out when we need it, because that seems to be what we do every year anyway.
Well, you know, the fact is that insofar as our budget is special ed related, you know, the truth is we don't have 100% control over it.
Oh, no,
Because
absolutely.
that is a mandate of federal law and enforced by the state and enforced by the IEP process. And so if a child, we can budget whatever we want to. We could put in $2 into the outplacement line.
Yeah, but then if you
Then
put
we'd be in
$2 in the
then we'd be
outplacement-
in violation of federal laws if
Yeah,
we
but
didn't.
if you put $2 in, Bill, then all of a sudden, you know it's not going to be $2.
I understand that.
And so you're going to be taking it out of other parts of the budget. So all you're doing is knocking down all the other parts of the budget by
Well,
not putting enough in that budget line. And what
there-
I'm saying is that you're putting
So,
in, while
why-
you're taking out $25,000 out of this budget, all you're doing is taking it from somewhere else.
I
that you
think
don't
the
know.
arguments in favor of a higher increase than where we are right now are substantially stronger than the arguments in favor of a lower increase. I mean, and from a programmatic point of view. However, there is a reality that the grand list in town is flat, effectively, and you know we have to, on the one hand, balance the educational needs of the district and delivering a good product with the maintained political support of a substantial majority of the town. I don't know. I mean, there is an argument that you should try to push harder and then let the town see if the town will accept it. I understand that. I've never particularly, you know, that's never been my
I just
approach.
don't understand why it's our job to do that. And I've always not understood
that's-
that.
Well, okay. I mean, that's just a difference, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I think it's fair to say that if we look back historically over the last 7 years that I've been on this board, my memory, and I may be wrong, is that each year we have had a surplus by the end of the year and have turned back to the town X amount of dollars. It hasn't been great dollars, but certainly it's more than the $25,000 that we're talking about in the site improvements thing. So that tells me that the administration is very careful about watching every dollar. And at the end of the year, if there is excess, and there are still needs, whether it's in site improvement or wherever it is, that's there. Not that they're building in a cushion at all, it just is good management. So we've never, and I shouldn't say never, but in my experience, we have not gone back to the Board of Finance and asked for more money. We've never done that. We've managed with what we have and have always, in the last 7 years, and Keith, your memory goes back longer, had a surplus.
But you take a look at the budget line items that you've actually saved money on, and I would argue that those budget line items are the ones that we're actually hurting on at this particular point in time. So in other words, yes, tuition still continues to go up, so we've given back $50,000 to the town, but that $50,000 didn't come out of the tuition line budget, didn't come out of where'd it come out of? Well, it came out of things that we might have been able to spend the money on. Now, understand, by the time the end of the year happens, you can't do projects you might want to do, you can't put programs in you might want to, and you have extra dollars at the end. I get that, but to sit and say, well, because we're giving back money, we should lower our budget for this year, I don't buy into that, so.
Oh, and that's not what I hear Dr. Myers
That's not what I
saying. As we put the budget together and as we go through amendments or adjustments like the ones in front of you, we keep this sort of dual reality in our minds at the same time. Each time that we look at a singular line item and make a suggestion for a reduction, like tuition, we honestly believe that we are going to come in on that line item at the level that we have projected. We think that we will be able to meet our tuition expectations with the $25,000 reduction we're proposing tonight and the reduction that we made to Dr. Johnson's original proposal. We look at each line item and we have that understanding in our mind. We also know that over the whole course of the budget, we're not going to bat 1,000. We know that every line item, so we try to budget each one to be honest and fair and accurate, but we know that they're not all going to reflect that. There are going to be years where salaries have an overrun in one area, but a shortfall in another area, and we will be able to make those adjustments. So in a large sense, it is one large allowance that we're asking for, and we need to live within the total allowance, but we have these markers at each place. I prefer the 3.39% budget that we proposed, but I really do believe that we will be able to meet all of our expectations and come away proud of what we do next year with these changes. And I think some are easier. The transportation one is an easy one for us all to agree on. I'm pretty proud of the negotiating that we've conducted. We've gotten to a good place, and that's going to recognize a savings for everybody. In the other areas, it is either wisdom and patience that has come with experience. I do believe that we are going to need increased administrative staff in this district. But I think that adding half a position this year is a step in the right direction, and we can build. We didn't launch Bright Connections with 12 students this year. We launched it with 4. We're already up to 5, and we project to be at 9 or 10 next year. So I'm not excited about reducing the increase, but I recognize that an increase is still a move in the right direction, and I'm excited to move in that direction. I want to go back and reiterate some of the initial justifications for placing that position in the budget, and I want to be really clear. I think Dr. Frisella made a very good decision with what was on the table when he made that decision in 2008 or 2009. Fiscal realities were crumbling around all of us at that time. The futures report that is driving some of our local decisions had not yet been commissioned, let alone received. We had not looked at what was in that report. The state had not released any information on what the new evaluations were going to look like. They were just a suggestion at the time. I think it is fair to say that environmental conditions have changed dramatically since then. So I'm not second-guessing anybody else's decision, and I'm not suggesting that this board didn't move in a prudent direction when that decision was made. But we have focused local energies on building our special education program capacity, the ability to keep more of our kids at home. We have to meet the new evaluation expectations. And I think in some of the other areas, there's other evolving information. I had breakfast with Congressman Courtney this morning. 13 superintendents sat with Representative Courtney, who's going to D.C. and looking at legislation. There is a proposal from Senator Franken that we increase school psychologists and social work staffing in all schools across the country, so that we have deeper benches of mental health professionals in our schools. We talked about possible grant funding that may be coming out that could enhance or offset some of the bond requests or some of the site improvement work that may need to go into security areas in our schools. There's just a lot of changing conditions. I do think that we need to have the capacity to properly administer the things that we choose to do in-house. Keith, we're working with technology and software in a number of areas. In the last 2 years, we've brought in new special education software. We are bringing in new school bus routing and GPS software, including at-home applications that parents will have access to. We're expanding the use of our business office budgeting and purchase order software. We're looking into cloud computing and off-sourcing some of our functions that we do in-house, like email. Our core mission is not about managing our email. If we can find a way to contract or off-source some of that so that we can have our in-house technicians in classrooms working with teachers. So a lot of the questions sort of have strings and strands and lines that cross over. I think that having a well-staffed, strong administrative team in special education speaks to bringing down the tuition line, because we will be managing those programs properly, we will be avoiding mistakes, and we will have more parents like the one who spoke to us Monday night, sort of cheering us on and encouraging us to move in that direction. But I recognize the necessity of prudence and patience. And increasing by half a position is an increase. We will build on those positions and those successes. I came back before the school year ended last year and suggested adjustments to our budget moving forward. We adjusted positions in central office mid-budget. We worked within the budget, but we made changes along the way. I don't know that we won't be back midterm suggesting, Keith, that we've got more students going into those in-house programs than we expected. We will be able to identify costs avoided in the area of tuition and be requesting increases in the aid line. But I will feel very positive and very excited doing that if I can show offsetting costs that have been avoided or savings that have been realized when making those requests. So again, I think that each of these individual lines, we're fairly confident that we will meet those lines. Within the whole budget of $54,491,000, I know that we have room to maneuver. But we also sort of commit to each of those lines. The site improvement line is not a slush fund. It is money that our buildings need. It is money that needs to be invested in those buildings, and we will manage it prudently and try to spend. And when you go on vacation with the family, you don't go for the big expensive dinner the first night you're on the island. You wait and you make sure that the last night before you get the ferry home, that's the night you go out and have the great big dinner. We want to push spending towards the end of our fiscal year when possible. And if we can schedule things that can be done at the end of the fiscal year, that's the prudent way to do that. We call that a freeze sometimes. That sounds like we're using one line to bail out another. If we have to do so, we are. But if we can just manage it, my goal is not to turn back a lot of money at the end of a school year. It is to spend down to a reasonable amount. Turning back 50 or 100,000 in a $55 million budget is pretty close. It's difficult to get much closer than that. So we feel good about that. We will continue to target that. We met with the new director of Learn today. We talked with the new director at Learn about how the regional resource can help us better. Can help with the special ed work that we're doing moving forward, can help us to partner with neighboring districts more effectively. I have a meeting with Congresswoman DeLauro in the next couple of weeks to keep working on those funds. At your next board meeting, we will have all of our state representatives here to talk with you about how they can help us and support us as we move our budget forward. I think I've touched on most everything but full-day kindergarten. Maybe I'll pause here and have some conversation about what's in the budget, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that aren't in the budget.
I mean, I started this thing off a little bit, so I guess what I'm looking at is the fact that, I don't think we should go back up to the 3.39%, but I do think that of the two areas that have my biggest concern are the site improvements, only because they continually do. Whether or not you'd not like to use them as a slush fund, they tend to end up being one. But also, again, since we're investing so much in the special ed coordinator, I just don't think that, I mean, for half a position, I mean, right now the work's getting done by somebody else. Okay, so you're going to put half a position in here, and that person's going to take over that half position. They're not going to really have an impact going forward on the new program at all, because, I mean, maybe this is my assumption that some other person is spending half their time basically doing this work. So if you give them a full-time position, that would allow them not only to take over the responsibilities of the person who's actually doing some of that work today, but also give them the opportunity to actually have a positive impact in the program going forward.
I'm not sure that's true, though, is it? Because really you're talking about some of these increases in the administrative level are related to the new evaluations that are not currently in place right now. And so it is new work.
Well, it's some of it's new work, but at this particular point in time, I mean, from what I heard in the meetings we've had, is that there is other people, other administrators doing the work that a special ed coordinator would normally do.
It's a combination of both. The reality is that to a large degree, the special ed work at the high school level has been absorbed by the high school administrative team. So where there was a principal, an assistant principal, 2 deans, and a special ed coordinator that were all managing that share, much of the special education load at the high school has been absorbed by the assistant principal and the dean positions at the high school. In addition to that, yes, there's new work coming on board. There's new evaluation work, and there's going to be new management administrative responsibilities associated with the new high school. So it's a combination of both.
As a question, do you believe that the new work that's coming on for the Common Core should be part of the dean's work or part of a half-time special ed coordinator? I mean, what I'm saying is that that new work that's coming
Right.
on is going to take the job of the dean who might be now doing special ed, and he's going to have to do special core stuff.
Right.
So that's going to leave this work for special ed. I'd rather have a special ed coordinator doing a special ed coordinator job as opposed to having a dean do it.
All the work's going to get done next year.
Yeah.
And in addition to rejuggling the positions, there's also a number of new team players. So we've brought Mr. Bowden on board. We've brought Mrs. Brown on board. We've brought Mrs. Hale on board. Mr. Kaiser, I did want to, I missed one point. Mrs. Brown begins today. That's not a new position. She is, in fact, replacing Dr. Brett. We've been running short-staffed. We have had Dr. Johnson here, and he has done very well in an interim position, but our team has been less than full since the end of last school year when Dr. Brett left the district, and we've been waiting to replace her with a full-time permanent replacement. So Mrs. Brown brings the team back to fully staffed with permanent administrative positions. And then the idea of adding the additional special ed coordinator goes to the fact that we're asking more of Mrs. Brown than was asked of Dr. Brett. We are bringing in-school, in-district programs in and asking her to take the responsibility for those in-district programs, bringing students who are currently out or will be out into district. Additionally, as we begin to delve into the deeper layers of that futures report, we'll also then be looking at training for the staff members who work in special education and related areas, clarifying roles and responsibilities within those areas, and if possible, recognizing some efficiencies in staffing, because that was identified as well. So the idea of increasing is to give her a full team to help do that work. And again, where now she has today 2 administrative positions working with her and strong partnerships in all the building. Next year, with this proposal, she'll have 2.5, and I'd like to build to 3, but I'm okay building. I'm okay saying, if I have to. And the way that that reduction of an increase was scheduled was that we're absorbing that extra work at the administrative level. The places where we have insulated the original requests are places that are in direct support of classroom teachers and are closer to kids. It is in the instructional coaches who will be helping teachers to be more effective every day with every student. It is in the technology integration specialist. So I understand your point and I really appreciate it. Yes, we will all be working harder with half an administrator than with a whole administrator. But we've absorbed that at the administrative level, and in fact, if possible, we're going to work with the position to take the half that we have, create the support at the building level, and absorb that at the central office level. So I've already talked with Mrs. Brown. I've already talked with Mr. Macenti about how we're going to shape that half. I know he's back there cheering this conversation on. Where we place the new half a position is going to have to be placed to be supportive of the work at the high school. My priority is that swing shift with the alternative high school. I do not intend to say to Mr. Macenti and his team at the high school that you're all in at 7:30 and you're going to have kids until 5 and we're looking at flexing our staff so that we have an administrator whose role is in this building with that program until 5. Then picking up as many of the PPTs here at the high school level or evaluations of special ed staff placed here at the high school as possible. And then when we run out of FTE, then filling in that shortfall from the rest of the special education office, from the rest of the central office, and doing the best we can to get that done. To some degree, we are anticipating some relief in the implementation from the state. When we made the request for the full-time position, I wasn't yet confident that there was going to be some flexibility in implementation. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think there's going to be some flexibility. So again, if the state's going to slow down the rollout of the evaluation, I'm okay phasing in that position. I do expect at this time that unless things change again, I'll be back asking for the balance of that position this time next year. But again, I understand the balance of a budget. I would like to have full-day kindergarten in this budget as well, and that's not here. That's not here, not because I don't think it's important, not because I don't remain committed to it, but because I didn't think that we could achieve that this year. I think that with what we put in front of you, I'm excited about the budget. We'll get to where we need to be. I'd rather have more. I appreciate the comments, but I think that we're in a good place. I don't know if I answered half of the questions that you asked.
I mean, I guess I think the arguments in favor of another full-time coordinator are really very good, but I would like to see, there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem for me, and that is that I'd like to see some more progress on the futures report on some of the other things that are identified as efficiencies, that they're not related to the...
Who's going to do that?
Well, I think the Director of Special Services is going to do that, and I think it's not fair to say that the only way that's going to get done is to hire another special ed coordinator. I don't think there's any basis for saying that.
I just think there's so much amount of work.
Let me finish. We are hiring a new special ed director who started today. We have a high degree of confidence that she is a very skilled person and is going to bring a review. I mean, we interviewed her and talked in great length about the futures report. She never one time said, I cannot implement the recommendations here unless I have another administrator. It just didn't come up. It was never said. And I think...
Well, you don't ask the question. Never mind. Go ahead.
I think that it is quite reasonable to say that the special ed director may be able to identify $75,000 in savings out of a $10 million budget item to help move forward to a full-time funding of a special ed coordinator. I think we're putting a lot of money into special ed in this budget, a lot. And that's fine. I think it's wise. It's good educationally, and it's good as just economics. But that doesn't mean that we can do everything. And I think that this is a reasonable way to take an intermediate step.
To supplement what you just said, Bill, I was on the search committee searching for the new special ed coordinator, and she has had experience with their futures report and has experience doing exactly what we're asking of her to do, which is what you're suggesting. So my feeling is, let's give her a chance. She just started today. Let's see what she can do. If it's not possible to do all of that, and if John's right, then I think Paul will be back here next year asking for more, or if we find it's not possible and we still need to meet our IEP obligations and everything else, we'll find a way to do it. But I think Mrs. Brown is a very talented woman, and let's give her a chance.
I think it's a small amount of money to give to somebody to make sure they're successful.
Okay, well,
It's okay.
It's okay.
Well, does anybody else believe that we should add a full-time coordinator to the budget? Would be one way to kind of...
I'll put a motion on the table.
Well, I think technically we need to vote on the budget, but I'm just trying to get a consensus. Are there others that believe we should add that back into the budget?
I mean, I see both sides of it. I think, Gary, you were saying we justify even the half. So, yeah, I don't know. I see it as a reasonable compromise. I do see both sides of it, but I really think we ought to hear a bit more from Virginia. This is not something that happens overnight. We've learned that as far as bringing out placements back in, and so a decision, a half FTE one way or the other, is not, I think, going to be binding for us for years to come. I think it'll be very helpful to hear more from her once she's had a chance to get in here and see what her resources are. So I think it's a reasonable compromise at a half FTE, but I don't want to tie anyone. That's why I was asking you. I don't think you'd put this out here if you didn't think she could get it done. I understand it's always better to have, might be nicer to have more resources, but I think it's a reasonable compromise as is on the revised budget.
The question at one point was asked if we were to make adjustments to this budget, and if we were going to try to bring this budget down, where would we make those reductions? The fact is, there's only two places that we can look, and it's going to be in site improvements and it's going to be in positions. And I think what we've done with the areas that we've identified is spread it out, and we've tried to minimize the impact in any one area. I'm gratified
much
that we're
more
not
heavily weighted toward personnel than site improvements. So we're
Absolutely, because one, there's a larger amount of money there, and two, I agree with we've made a concerted effort in 2 years to try to build up site improvement. But even in the personnel areas, we did not eliminate any one position completely. And I think the question was asked last week, if you had to give up something, what would you give up? And I think I skirted the question and didn't give up anything completely. I compromised on one. I've taken a step back to trying to phase in the administrative position. But again, when it comes to the transition coordinator or the classroom coaches or the places that are closer to direct student play, we've insulated those new requests, and we will work to convince the community and the board that, and the logic that we discussed around the paraprofessionals could absolutely apply to the administrator as well. If we can show efficiencies in other areas, creating the efficiencies is going to grow the local work, and so I don't think that anybody would be surprised if I came back even mid-budget and said, we're looking at bringing costs down, these programs are increasing enrollment faster than we expected, therefore we'd like to increase the support for this position. And again, it may offer an opportunity for somebody to straddle a position and be in the teaching ranks for part of the day and in the administrative ranks for part of the day, and could be an opportunity for somebody to develop some administrative experience from within the district. I don't know if that will play out or not. At this point, we've made a funding change. We have yet to sit down and talk about what this .5 will actually look like. I need Mrs. Brown to spend a few days in district and get her feet under her and sit down with Mr. Macenti and Mrs. Brown and Mr. Bowden and look at how that position can best be used. And if it needs to be a .6, again, we can make those kinds of adjustments within the staffing lines that we have in this budget.
Just one last question, and then I'll be quiet, promise. When it comes to priorities of these,
Yep.
how would you rank the priorities associated? Is it actually the way that it's on the sheet? In terms of kind of priority and comfort level type of thing? Like obviously transportation, negotiate a good deal, you're pretty comfortable with that number is going, so that's okay. Where do the other ones fall?
It was in rough priority when we provided it to you, except the most priority was in top half and bottom half. There were some items at the top of the list, like transportation and site improvement and the paraprofessionals, that I said, I recognize those and I can see over the horizon, and I think that we can be okay in all of those areas clearly. Below that line, I then clumped together a lot of things that I am very invested in, and that is the technology integration specialist, the instructional coaches, the math position, and the administrator, and they all landed in there together. It is in a pretty rough priority order, the way that I've given it to you from top down.
I didn't get that. Sorry, I didn't get the priority list.
That was at a prior meeting.
That might have been Tuesday evening, I apologize. Yes, the way that they show on this list reflects that as well. If I was able to start adding back in, I'd like to add from the bottom of the list up is the way that I would like to add back in if that were an opportunity. Yes.
It's always an opportunity.
I mean, looking at things from another perspective in terms of benchmarking here, and Bill has some other information that he may chime in if needed, but the you always have more information. I mean, our special ed costs compared to other districts, when you look at that, then we are spending more when you look at the median and what the average is.
the way we account it, yes.
Yes,
You know,
right, and there's always
but it's
caveats on statistics and which way you go with that. So that's one reflection. We just generally know it, and I'm not using that to go one way or the other at the moment. The other piece is where our other total expenditures are per pupil, tax rate, and so forth. And I know that's what Bill has looked at and brought back up, and has some stuff here probably to mention on that. I think responsibly wise, we are in tune with being in the median area on those types of things, as opposed to being off the chart, to be, quote, wasteful, or not spending it wisely, or on the other hand, to be really low and the public not give us what we need to do our job properly, and therefore you're trying to make a big drastic correction, and it's hard to, in a budget situation, to have big tax increases to get from somewhere where you don't want to be higher. So just another reflection on that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, for the state report that just came out in December, we are 84th in the state of Connecticut in terms of our per pupil expenditures, or net per pupil expenditures, and okay, I mean, there's, as I said earlier, I think the weight of the arguments are in favor of a higher budget than what Dr. Freeman is putting forward here today. On the other hand, it would be nice if we had a 3% grand list growth, say, in a way that didn't also increase services needs. So if anybody wants to put that office building down by the train station or whatever, you know, that makes a difference in our budgets, that kind of development, if it happens. But you know, I think we've worked very, very closely, and we've got a good relationship with the Board of Finance in terms of their giving us their thoughts about what the increase in the grand list, and they also have the perspective of what's happening with the town budget, which we don't, you know, we haven't directly shared with the town about. But you know, I think that they have, I think, expressed some hope that we will be in this area. That certainly was the tenor of what I got from the meeting that we had with them, whenever it was, 2 weeks ago. And if you're saying that from an educational point of view, this is, if not a perfect budget, is a really good budget, that's kind of good enough for me, based on what we all know about it and based on the amount of time we've worked on it.
I'll take that as a cue to take and recommend that we adopt the budget as put forward here to us today, and present that onto the Board of Finance, totaling $54,491,186.
I'll second
All right. We can have discussion. I certainly, and I absolutely appreciate.
Well, now's the time for an amendment to take and make some.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would amend to it is that we put a whopping, I think it's $80,000 back in for the special ed coordinator, as well as, I mean, you can call it site improvements or tuition, because to me, they kind of end up going from the same, you know, they end up swapping each other out anyway. So if you want to put it back in tuition or back in site improvements, I'd personally put it back in site improvements, because I've never actually seen it go from tuition to site improvements. So we put $80,000 back into the budget for those two line items. A whopping 0.0015, or 15 points, or 15% of 1%.
Right back up to 3.13.
So you want, your request would be to add 80,000 to the 54,491,186, or is your request to move 80 within categories?
Yeah.
No, is to add 80 to the 1577 to make it 1657.
Well, let's work off of the total, because otherwise
Okay.
I'm going to get very confused.
You're saying to stop at 3.13% increase.
Right.
All right. So Mr. Bishop has made a motion that we adopt the budget as presented by Dr. Freeman in the amount of $54,491,186. You seconded it, Ms. Renner. Mr. Ireland has moved to add 80,000 to that. Is there a second to that motion? Motion fails for lack of a second. Is there any other discussion on the 54,491,186? All right. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Abstain.
You're going to
Abstain.
abstain? Who's abstaining?
I am.
Okay. All right. Well,
Somebody.
Dr. Freeman, that is that, as they say.
Thank you all. Thank
Although, we should talk a little bit about the timeline at this point. The timeline is February 14, I believe the board presents its budget to the Board of Finance, along with the town. That's going to be at 7:30 at the community center, I assume?
Yes.
Happy
Yes.
Valentine's Day
Happy
to us all.
It's better that way. And then the next is the Board of Finance votes on,
Annual budget meeting is tentatively scheduled for April 2nd, with a referendum tentatively on April 9th.
Okay. Good. All right, well then, that is that, as they say, so, but I understand we have another agenda item.
We do. Before moving on to that agenda item, may I mention to the board that next week for our regular meeting, I have added an agenda item. We will be asking that we waive our bidding regulation for the purposes of the transportation contract. I do want to note for the board that we met with the transportation company last week. We went over the existing contract with them item by item, and we are proposing renewing the existing contract at the 1.5 renewal annually for 5 years. There's one note that they brought to our attention that I want to make sure that we bring to all of your attention. We're proposing to do a letter of renewal, and the letter of renewal will say on existing contract language, there will be a note that we expect to use the existing, or they expect to use the existing fleet. When you look at our existing fleet and compare it to the age of the vehicle in the contract, out of our 30 large-size buses, there are exactly 7 that will be beyond the current contract language in the 4th and 5th years of the contract. So they will just be out by 1 and then 2 years at the end of the contract. We have offsetting language in the contract that speaks to maintenance, upkeep, repair, cleanliness of vehicles, and finally, for overall performance. We have the ability to exit the contract for lack of performance at any point. So they've made it very clear that to them that is an important component, because they can look to go into this contract knowing that they don't have a capital outlay off the bat, and that makes the renewal rate possible for them. We also recognize that 24 of the existing vehicles would be within the existing contract language regardless. And of those ones that are just on the edge, we're going to pay attention to those up front. We went through the actual inventory. We know each of those vehicles by name and by number. We will continue to monitor those, to work with those, and we believe that that is a very reasonable renewal. All of the other language in the contract comes forward with us, and even though they will be just outside of the actual model year, we have offsetting language that speaks to the quality of the vehicle, the safety, the cleanliness of the vehicle, and the overall performance. It was a lengthy meeting. It was a positive meeting. I'm going to continue to recommend that we take this renewal. I think it is a very favorable renewal for us. They want to maintain the business, and they want to retain the relationship that they have here in Guilford. We are their foothold district. They do have business in Region 17. They do have another small contract, they have business in 17 and in Groton, but we're their foothold on the shoreline. They're invested in this community. They're invested in this contract, and they don't want to lose this contract, and they don't want to lose the buses that they have stationed here. I think it's a very favorable renewal for us.
How many years before buses age out under the current contract? 7 years, was it?
The contract says that a bus needs to be no more than 10 years old, and we currently have some 2006s in the fleet. So as those 2006s get into the 4th and 5th year of the contract, they're going to begin aging out. It is 7 of our vehicles. The next oldest vehicle after that is a 2009, and then we have some that are even newer than that. They would fall within the parameters of that item regardless.
And the buses have names, you said?
Well, numbers actually, but we went through vehicle by vehicle, and so we know what we're talking about, and we will monitor those buses as we get towards the end of this contract renewal.
My recollection was that there's state regs that then are 10 years, not out longer than 10 years as far as age of the in-service bus vehicle, but
I'd have to check that.
That's something I need to take and check on, or
If there is a
Bill
state
will
reg,
have
then
an
I'm very
answer in
comfortable
60
with the
seconds.
agreement.
Bill's gonna beat you to it here.
Signing
We'll know in a few minutes.
So that was just one thing to verify there. So their proposal then is that they would not have any capital equipment expense over the next 5 years in order to meet that 1.5% per year.
No planned capital investment, but if a bus, and we have not had any maintenance or upkeep issues with this company since we've had the agreement with them. They swap out buses regularly. The facility in Haddam-Killingworth is a repair facility, so they will take one of our buses up there to do work and swap a bus from their Groton yard or their HK yard and get a bus to us. We have had concerns about filling driver slots. We had a press last year to hire more drivers. In fact, when we expressed our concern, they offered a signing bonus to get drivers in. But we've never had a concern with maintenance or upkeep on the buses that they've provided.
Because another way of approaching it doesn't mean it has to be new equipment to us either, that they could have another contract that they don't get renewed, and they've got a 5 or 6 year old bus that could come in that still keeps it that direction as well. So just want to make sure that they should know it, and they wouldn't have theoretically provided something it wouldn't be.
I found out today that they have swapped out buses and brought in newer buses because the original list that we had more 2006 buses on it than the list they gave us the other day. So they swapped out the older buses already and brought in newer ones.
Yeah, well, that's why I asked the question, a meeting or two ago to say get the current equipment listing, because that stuff, does happen. And
School buses are inspected by the DMV once a year, in-house every 3 months. There is no age limit. But then there are many specs that are grandfathered. And DMV can also do random inspections at any time.
We also have there's language in the contract that gives us the ability to request maintenance and repair logs, cleaning logs, to inspect any of the vehicles. So we have a large degree of latitude. And the final clause is simply the performance clause. If we're unsatisfied with the contractor's performance in any way, we document that, and we have the ability to exit this contract sooner.
yeah, I think we got good language that we've worked over the past couple of times together to go that way.
And so that'll be on the agenda for Monday.
Yes, but I wanted to apprise you of the meeting.
Yeah, if anybody has any real concerns, about it, we should deal with that before Monday if we possibly can. At least concern questions should be answered before Monday. All right, so the next item on the agenda?
Yeah, I'm gonna.
We're not doing bonding?
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I forgot about that. Thank you. Bonding. The list is
What we handed out the last meeting.
same list. Is that still where we are?
Yeah.
We just took a look at the list and just chunked it differently to make the two broad categories that we had discussed previously.
We're working off the one dated 1/29/15.
Well, that one has the detail on it. This one is just a...
This is just a cover sheet that shows it in two areas. We've identified deficiencies and upgrades and health and safety as the two broad areas.
Do you want to summarize them, or does Mr. Gurnham want to summarize them? You want, or
I can.
you want to do it? Fine.
For deficiencies upgrades, we're looking at a total package of 1.304288, of which a majority of them are for the replacements of doors and windows at Cox, just under $1 million. The other ones are smaller items. In terms of, one of them's earmarked for about 134 for the replacement of the music equipment storage units, which we rebuilt once in-house many, many years ago, and they again have fallen apart. So we're actually going to contract those out. There is some dollars in here also for design engineering for Adams as being our next school that we're going to be looking at window, door, and classroom renovations at in terms of the envelope itself. So those just have engineering dollars to get us started on that. And one of the other line items is about $50,000. We have a facility needs assessment coming back to us. That's scheduled actually for the 14th for the RFPs to actually be returned from contractors. We're going to look at that, and we'd like to put some dollars in there in order to make some of those, or start some of the process of you could say, fixing some of the deficiencies that will probably be identified within that, that report. The other one, the health and safety package is for $319,000. Sidewalks and parking upgrade plus a phone and paging system are small amounts, $30,000 and $40,000 each, but the large one is for security upgrades throughout the district. And I don't know how much detail you want to go into on that. We've talked about it several times before in terms of this for $250,000.
It's really about looking at the entrances and security protocols and structures around the entrances to our buildings.
So it's a total of 1.623677 for both packages combined. So moved.
So you move that we move that forward to the Board of Finance?
Yes.
Second?
Second.
All right. Questions, comments, discussion? We talked a lot about this, obviously, and I think everybody agrees that the Cox work just has to be done. It's the next, we're trying very hard to take care of the envelope, and that is the next school that has some, and I take it all of the windows and so forth are original equipment from the 50s?
Single pane.
50s or 60s?
Original single pane glass.
That'd be 50s.
1968, I believe.
Yeah, I
is
think, I
Cox.
mean, just a comment, I think it's a very reasonable amount of money, given what we need to invest in the district, with the majority of this being on envelope. And, one of the things we didn't mention a lot in the budget, we were actually seeing some reduction in sort of heating costs and things like that, and I think that may reflect the fact that we've invested in some better insulation and better, more economical heating sources. So I think this moves in the right direction. The other thing that we're doing is really thinking forward a little bit in terms of putting some money into assessments and engineering. We've gotten into more of that 2-year step where we invest some money so that we get a much better idea of exactly how much we need for a bond, which is a better way to do it than to say, I think it's about this much, and have to do it in 1 year. So I think both of those things are moving in the right direction. So
There's also a shift, as you can see. What ends up happening is when you go into a district or go into a project and you take a look at large items, those tend to get ticked off first. And in the last bunch of years, we've done lots of large items, lots of roofs, lots of envelope projects, lots of mechanicals, things of that nature. It doesn't mean there's none left. It just means that as you start looking at them, those become a fewer portion. And what happens is you start looking at smaller projects. Now, with that shift, of course, comes the idea that a lot of these projects are going to start to move into the less than 20-year kind of category. And again, I'll put it forward that we have a site improvements budget that is covering some of it. We have a bond that's covering 20 years plus in terms of improvements. We still need something in the middle that's going to help us do things that are going to last 5 or 10 years in terms of better financing and better ways to manage the budget and manage the dollars that we have, because I don't think we have many more years left of putting some of these things into 20 years. Okay? So a lot of the 20-year projects have been done.
Right.
Okay? We're going to come up against them again in 10, 15 years, but not over the next 5 to 10 years. So I would urge any additional dollars we have at the end of the year, of course, to go into the short-term capital.
Well, yeah, and we've made that request to the Board of Finance how many years in a row now?
Hopefully times are changing and our things are better.
It's possible because, the fund balance is increasing. We've got our health line, our health benefits line is in very good shape right now, so we don't have
Board of Finance has done a great job in improving that line item. And now hopefully we're at a point where we can start looking at other opportunities.
that's something that neighboring towns have done, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and I think it's a really good thing to start thinking about and having discussions with the Board of Finance, short-term capital fund.
Yeah, so let's just underspend by about $500,000 this year, and then we can take care of that, huh? Got that?
It's only 1%.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion's on the table.
Motion's on the table, seconded. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that is that.
Thank you.
What? No.
I'm going to just move for this item, just for purpose of using the slide view station. So, February 25th, we will be asking the board to approve the construction documents that have been put together by the building committee. The documents that you will be approving are in the middle of the room. That's not multiple sets. That's just one set of the drawings that the building committee and the Board of Education need to submit collaboratively to BSF, the Bureau of Schools and Facilities. Rather than coming to you on February 25th and presenting these documents and expecting the board to be familiar with these documents at a certain level, what I wanted to do was to give a very high-level overview this evening where I will try to speak to the original ed specs and the design work that the building committee has done, how the building works, how the building functions, what elements of the ed specs, how certain elements of the ed specs live in the design as we present it to you tonight, and then I will try to highlight areas where we have diverged from the educational specifications that were put together. We will then keep these documents at Lathrop House from now until the 25th, and you are welcome to come and review, but these are documents that speak to the construction at a level of detail that the board is not expected to master or memorize. Your commitment is to acknowledge that these documents have delivered the building that this board envisioned and articulated in the educational specifications. So these docs will be there for the next 21 days for your review, but I can speak much better to the slides that we've put together tonight than I will be able to help you with these. Members of the building committee have offered their services if you would like to invite someone to meet you at Lathrop House and to help speak to some of the detail in here. I think the only one with any facility with these documents tonight here is going to be Mr. Ireland. I'm not going to be a great deal of help with some of these. I do, however, want to talk about the design. Mr. Ireland, Mr. Macenti, and I have been to, and Mr. Gurnham, have been to almost every building committee that has met for the last year and a half. We've been involved in multiple conversations with multiple subcommittees. I have been involved in 4 school construction projects in the state of Connecticut, and I have never witnessed the community involvement in a project like the community involvement that I have seen in this project in Guilford. I am proud of the design that we have achieved. I'm excited about the design that we've achieved, and it will be fun to give you a very high-level overview tonight. I thought I would take you through some important pieces and then have a conversation about the building, and we'll see if all of this works. Oh, I'll start with this one. This is an elevation. This is the view of the building from New England Road. This looks directly down the bus loop. So if you were pulling in a school bus, this is what you would be seeing as you pull in. The building from this view from New England Road is 2 stories. You see 2 stories. The lowest level is below ground level from this vantage point. The site that you are familiar with is pictured here. The existing building is detailed in this red outline. That is the existing high school. It sits essentially right up to the curb of New England Road. The new school will be placed directly behind the high school as it exists today. It is a much smaller footprint. It is oriented differently, and the site will then be completed around the new school with a dedicated bus loop that comes in right off of New England Road, and then reconstructed parking. The parking that you see identified matches the existing parking on the property site, space for space. We have exactly the same number of parking spaces in the new building as we have now. Our population is not projected to change significantly, so the existing parking is appropriate. Up here, on the very northwestern corner of the property, will be an area that will allow for parking expansion. This would be an area that in future years could be graveled, it could be paved, it would provide 56 additional spaces. It is not part of the project that we are presenting to the state on March 4th, but it will be prepared to be expansion parking at any time in the future. It is part of the project that was presented to planning and zoning, so that approval for that expansion will be included in approval for this. Additionally, there is the addition of 1 new field. So because the footprint of the building is smaller, we get a better laid out site and we pick up a field. We will maintain all the existing fields. They will be relocated, many of them, but we net one additional multipurpose field or practice space or park and recreational space in this project on the site moving forward. This is simply a different view of the site. It shows you an aerial photo of the existing property, and then we have superimposed the new building, the new parking, and it is worth noting, just here, you see the retained science wing. The plan includes the retention of the science wing. All of the existing building will be demolished with the exception of the science wing, and we are currently discussing the board offering that science wing to the town, for the town to take over that building as town property. We project that that could provide much needed community storage space to the town by not demolishing that piece of the school.
On the site plan, the ropes course has been in discussion as far as where it can be
Yes.
placed, and has that been finalized at this point, or is that still?
Yes, placement of the ropes course has been finalized. The ropes course currently exists right about here. It is where this access road will need to be placed. The initial suggestion was that we clear some of this green area and simply push the ropes course back. We moved away from that because we did not want to infringe on that property line. We began to worry about having students, the ropes course is used during the school day, during PE sessions. We were concerned about clearing that separation between the school site and the neighbors. The proposed site for the ropes course, at this time, we have finalized the placement up here. The ropes course, essentially the ropes course is 4 telephone poles with equipment suspended from. It will be placed between the tennis courts and CO North. The ropes course is completely secured when not being used, so we're not concerned about the proximity to the sidewalk on New England Road. And in fact, we think that placing it here and sandwiching it between 2 pieces of school property is a better location than pushing it back right up against the property line, which was the original suggestion. We will need to look at student access. We're considering options that would involve using the actual sidewalk on New England Road. We're considering the possibility of access through the tennis courts, or possibly a path or a sidewalk that would grant access just south of the tennis courts, and that is being finalized now.
Okay, thank you.
The really exciting stuff is when we look inside the building itself, and this is where the educational specifications really come to life. The building is 3 stories. For purposes of explanation, I've started with the middle level. This is in fact the 2nd floor. Looking from New England Road at our school, this would be the main floor. The main entrance to the school exists here. This in fact is north facing. I should have rotated these slides for you and I didn't, but the north facing entrance is right here. This is patio and canopy. And when the students come off their school buses or when they have been dropped at the front of the school, they would enter the school through this foyer into this main hall. The white cutouts here that you see in what the architects describe as the bow tie section of the school, I particularly like that. These white cutouts in the bow tie section and the large white cutout here are open spaces that look down to the 1st level of the school. In the middle area, you look down over the open commons area. In these areas, you look down over open hallway spaces. As you enter the building, immediately to your right are the main administrative offices. This is where you would find the principal's office, the dean's offices, and here would be guidance and student support services. As you enter in, those would be offices with lots of glass looking out to the main foyer. The vestibule entrance would direct the public directly into the main office. So as you come into the building, you would enter the vestibule. The doors into the actual hall would be locked during school hours, and the public would enter directly into the main office when granted entrance into the building. The balance of the 1st floor is essentially filled with the media center, which is this L-shaped space here. Particularly exciting about the media center are the flexible classroom spaces that are connected to it. Actually, it's more of an S than an L. At the top of the S section here would be a flexible computer lab. That is a lab that is not assigned to any particular class or teacher. It is a multi-use technology area. We are envisioning that it would be laptops. It would not be stationary desk stations. And teachers could bring students there when everybody needed hands-on a piece of equipment. Just to the left of that, inside the media center itself, is an open classroom area that will be finished with furniture very similar to the main area classrooms, similar to what we have currently in the learning studio. That would be a flexible classroom space. Down in the bottom corner is a more enclosed space that could be appropriate for another classroom setting or for small community meeting, faculty meeting, professional development activity, as well as open space at the bottom of the S, where students would also be able to do research and activity. So ostensibly, in this media center, at any point during the school day, you could have as many as 4 different classroom activities taking place in this S area. You could have an open activity here, an open activity here, more closed off and more secluded or private activities happening in the 2 corner areas, and the media center doesn't have to be closed to walk-in student use while any of that activity is taking place. This bottom section here will be very flexible so that it is open to student use during the day and open for community use meetings in the evening. This is where we envision hosting our Board of Education meetings. The furniture would be very flexible, and we will have the projection ability to put projections like this one both behind the audience on this end of the room so that board members could look forward, and behind the Board of Education on this end of the room so that the audience can both be seeing the projection without having to ask everybody to crane their necks and move their chairs to achieve projection during one of our meetings. Most exciting about this main floor, and it repeats 5 times throughout the building, are the classroom pods. There are 5 of these classroom pod areas that you see pictured here. Each pod includes, and they're mirrors of each other, but each pod includes 2 science labs on the innermost section of the pod. This creates a spine through the building of the science labs. The science labs will stack up on each other on all 3 floors on either side of the main stairwell and elevator, so that on each floor, or on 2 of the main floors, on the 2nd and 3rd floor, there will be 4 science labs right across that vestibule from each other, right across that open area, and the remaining labs are up a flight or down a flight of stairs. From the science labs, you have a series of other multi-use classrooms that fan out around the rest of the pod. These are classrooms that can be assigned out for general purpose classes. They can be assigned to English language arts, history, social studies, world language, mathematics. Any of those classes can be assigned into any of these areas. In the center of each pod is a series of support areas. In that area, you have teacher office areas. You have small seminar rooms where teachers can meet with students in small areas. You have bathroom facilities for staff members, slightly larger bathroom facilities for students, and some degree of shared storage that would be in each of those areas. Looking across the next 50 years, these pods can be assigned very flexibly. As we move forward, if we chose to remain in a discipline structure, we could have an English language arts pod where there were 7 or 8 English teachers in a shared area with a shared office space in the middle. If we choose to move forward in more of a academy or house structure, if we move into the idea of an international baccalaureate program, or if we move into the idea of allowing students to have focused studies, then these can be staffed with teachers in a mix. Should we open up with a freshman house, you could put all of the freshman teachers into 1 or 2 of these pods and limit the amount of movement that teachers, that freshmen have to move. Lockers for the students are located in and around the U-shape on the inside so that they have access to their locker spaces, their classrooms, and a variety of the other support services like lavatories, all in this main area. Additionally, this back hallway is a widened hall. It is not simply a commuter hallway. It's not simply a place for passing. The hallway has been widened out There will be technology and there will be furniture in that area. We are viewing that as a satellite media center. It is essentially an internet cafe. In each of those areas, students could move out of the main classroom area in small groups. There will be furniture in those areas where the classroom instruction can break out and they could move out into those more open spaces. There are windows in the interior classrooms. There are windows at the back of the teacher area and at the front of the teacher area so that students can actually move out of the classroom but continue to be working in a supervised area. We envision charging stations. We will have internet connectivity in all of those areas, and those are places that in design will mirror what we see in the media center. So not just in function, but the appearance will help to make the connection between the media center and between those breakout areas within the classroom pods. The first floor, the lowest level of the building, is not visible from the northern entrance when you come in from New England Road. It is actually entered from the side. This is the west-facing parking area down at the bottom of our picture, and this would be the west entrance. This is the entrance that would be open for activity evenings, after school hours, on a Saturday, a Friday evening during the winter sports seasons. The community would be accessing the building by parking in the lower western parking lot and entering through this foyer here. And when you walk into a large open commons area. This is a very large open space. It is open to the floor above so that it is airy. There are monitor-style skylights arranged across the top of this area, so it is large and it is well lit. During the school day, this will function as our cafeteria. This is where lunches will take place. The kitchen and servery sits right on this corner of the commons. These breakout areas, actually these areas should not be colored white. Those should be shaded in gray because those are large open spaces. This area, these are the art studios that you see stacked here. These are all the technology spaces that you see represented in purple. There is a wood shop, there is a metal auto shop, there is a computer CAD shop, there is a television broadcast studio. We envision this space here being filled with the work product that the students create in these classroom areas. I can see one of the boats that the students build in their boat wood shop suspended, hanging in that area. In this area, one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, there are lockers that range down this hallway between Tech Ed and the art studios, and they are oversized and unusually sized lockers. So for the students who particularly find their home in these areas, they can be assigned locker space in those areas, and it's locker space that would be large enough to accommodate projects that may be worked on in the art studio, tools, materials, different pieces of equipment or material that those students might need in those tech areas or in those art classrooms. There are storage areas off of the commons where much of the furniture that is set out for lunch during the school day can be folded and stored, and by removing much of the furniture you can create a wide open space with less furniture and more mobility for evening events. You would be able to host dinners, intimate concerts, speaking engagements. There would be a number of things that we could do, junior proms, lots of activities that could be hosted in that open area. As you enter into the commons will also serve as an intermission area for both musical, theatrical, and athletic sporting events. Immediately to the north, or in this picture to our left, when you enter, you find the theater and music wing. Along the bottom are arranged the instructional classroom areas. There's a band classroom, an orchestral classroom, and a choral classroom, as well as some small rehearsal space and office space for the music staff. This is a variation from the ed specs. The ed specs spoke to two formal classroom spaces in this area. Through much conversation, through a lot of community involvement, those spaces were expanded to 3 instructional areas. You will note there is not a black box theater connected to this area. This is another variation from the ed specs. The Black Box Theater is being proposed as a possible add alternate to the project. There are plans that are drawn to show a black box that can come off of this hallway here, but at this point, budgeting, it appears to be a budgeting challenge to have the black box be part of this reality. We have had music staff, we've had high school staff be very involved in this. There has been a performing arts subcommittee of the building committee that has been formed. And at this time, we do believe that the addition of the third instructional space takes priority over the existence of the black box theater. We're looking to use these spaces as flexibly as possible. The main theater itself then sits right here. Current seating in our auditorium, in our theater, is approximately 430. We're projecting seating for, I believe, 650 in this auditorium. This auditorium includes an orchestra pit. We will be able, during musical productions, to remove a small number of seats and therefore have a pit so that the orchestra can sit lower than the stage. The pit itself will actually be adjustable, and there will be 3 levels of pit. We can have a recessed floor where the orchestra would sit during a theatrical performance. We can have the pit put at floor level and actually put floor seating over it. So during the seasons of the year, the winter season and the end of the school year, where we have a large number of musical performances, we will be able to maximize audience seating because all of the performers would be on stage. And in fact, there's a third level where the pit can actually be raised to stage height and create a thrust stage so that the stage itself projects out into the audience. So you have 3 different stage configurations, 2 different seating arrangements depending on how you use that. We have been working with a theater consultant and an acoustician that the architects have brought in. There was some conversation around this theater early on. There was some discussion and some pictures drawn of what was being described as the origami theater, where the theater had a multifaceted, folded internal shell. At this point, we have moved to a theater that is more utilitarian in nature. When you enter the theater, you will see a well-finished theater that at a certain level reverts to flat black paint and exposed catwalks in the ceiling. We recognize that this theater is a learning space for our students, and some of our students are learning about performing on stage, and others of our students are learning about working a room like this, and so we wanted the workings of this room to be open and obvious. When the lights go down, it will be beautiful and magic will happen on stage, but when you enter with full lights up, you will see a working theater, something that might look a little bit more like the Long Wharf Theater than like a really finished, polished hardwood theater that you would see in other areas. There is a back of house. There is a hallway that runs the length of the back of the building here. That is a slightly oversized hallway. That hallway will be open to the rafters. There won't be a hang ceiling in there. The corners in that area have been cut, and that has been done so that we will have the opportunity to build sets back here in our maintenance work area, build sets in here in technology classrooms, or offload sets from this direction in our loading dock or from this direction into the western parking lot, and be able to move large instruments, timpanis, tubas, set designs, and have access in and out of all of these areas through this main corridor that runs across the back here. To the right of the Commons when you enter, just as exciting, is the indoor athletic facility. When you look at the main gymnasium, the large space here, we will have a space that will be large enough to accommodate 3 varsity basketball games side by side by side if that was what we chose to do. 2 of the courts will be separated by a flexible hanging curtain, and the third court is actually separated by a hard masonry wall. That wall will allow us to do different sorts of functions. We could run a premier varsity basketball game in the center court running in this direction. We will open up bleacher seating on both sides that will not infringe on the playing space. And you could still at the same time, with separation, run a fencing tournament in this area to the back here if that was what we chose to do. At the same time, we could have a concert on stage going on this area here. This space has been somewhat modified from the educational specifications as they were originally written. This third gymnasium is slightly larger than what was identified in the educational specs, and we do need to note that the ed specs spoke about an interior hanging walking track that would be suspended in this area. That is not part of the drawing. That was let go because of concerns with square footage and some concerns about functionality in that interior space. The space does include the opportunity for an additional gym space here. This space is envisioned to be a padded floor. It has an area where you would be able to do wrestling practices. You could do karate or judo club meetings. Cheerleading could take place. A variety of sports that would require padded floor for tumbling sorts of activities could happen down here in this area.
Now, is that labeled as a fitness center, or?
With the opportunity to move the existing weight room equipment into the science wing, it would allow the community to maintain both a weight area, which would be in the existing science wing, and a more open fitness area here. This space was planned and sized properly so that should the opportunity to relocate the weight room to the science wing not pan out, all of that weight and Nautilus and aerobic equipment would fit in this space. But this solution allows us to have both the padded open area as well as the weight space. You would have to leave the building and walk across campus to access the weight room, which will be over in this area, but it will allow the community to maintain both. These areas here are essentially locker and coaching spaces that are related to the interscholastic programs. These are team rooms that will rotate season to season. So it would be the football locker room in football season. It would be a lacrosse locker room in lacrosse season. There is a section for men's sports, a section for girls' sports. They're balanced. There is an equal number of spaces and access for both, and they will rotate season by season. Looped around that in this slightly different colored L shape here is the nurses area as well as the trainers area. So the trainer connected to the PE and athletic programs has space that abuts the nursing station. It is located on this floor rather than the upper area because of its proximity to the gymnasium, to the large common spaces, and for easy student drop-off or pickup. If a student needs to leave ill, it's a very convenient space for a parent to come down, pull right up to the curb here, and pick up students who need to be excused from school. The interior spaces here, these are locker room and office facilities connected to our PE program. So these are facilities, we have both a girls' and a boys' locker room. There is sort of an S entrance where the students would enter into the locker room and exit into the gymnasiums here. There are offices for our PE teachers. There is office space up here for our athletic director, and these are large bathrooms that will serve as common bathrooms during the school day, and these would be the community bathrooms during after-school, weekend, evening events. So you would have theater productions happening here. There is a box office here. The servery can be opened for concessions, and the public bathrooms here. And again, we can be running musical or theatrical activities, PE activities, and there's a greater degree of separation now so that if you open the door to the theater during a basketball game, the students on stage don't necessarily hear the cheering from the basketball game. We have a much broader separation in this area. On this level, there are access to the outdoors here. There would be a patio in between these two wings that would extend the lunch area during weather that allows that. There is a patio and a set of stairs. There's a bit of grade here, but there is exit from the building in this direction as well, and this would allow students access to those lower fields where you saw the softball and baseball fields on the site design. This is really an exciting floor of the school. You have one of the base instructional pods here. And then the third floor of the building, all of the spaces on this side of the school are large area spaces. The music areas, the theater, the gymnasium, the commons, all have extended roof lines, and so they reach up higher. But the third floor of the building exists on the classroom wing. On the third floor, you have 2 additional classroom pods. There is an additional science lab that is located here with a greenhouse connected to it. This would be a biology lab, which would have access to a greenhouse. And then additional office space here. This is essentially the office space for school psychologists, social worker, mental health supports. There is an interior stairwell here, so that this office area is in fact open to the office area below, so that we do have communication from the administrative, the guidance, and the support office areas in this level up here. There are 2 elevators in the building. There is an elevator located here in the main foyer, just opposite the main stair, and there is an elevator located here on this area. It is close to the front door, and it would primarily allow access for members of the public who needed to access the third floor office areas. You would have access from either of these 2. This one is they're both sized properly, that they will both facilitate maintenance and custodial work after hours. This one in particular aligns with the maintenance areas on the lowest level, and so you'll have custodians using those elevators to assist with movement through the building after hours. Finally, without going into great detail, I did want to point out, I need to back up for a few slides. I failed to mention a couple pieces of the design that are important to note. One being on this floor, and it is the existence of the emergency shelter. There was specific note in the referendum for the emergency shelter at this level. There will be a generator located in this area, just off of the loading dock, and essentially everything below in this picture, in an actual orientation, everything to the west of this central dividing line will function as an emergency shelter for the community in need moving forward. The building is being built to meet the upgraded specifications for stability for an emergency shelter. The generator will provide power, water, heat, cooling to this area, so that in the case that this space needed to be used as an emergency shelter, you would have the large commons area that would essentially be used for daytime gathering, for meals. The kitchen and servery would be fully functioning. You additionally would have access to the gymnasium spaces, and you could separate the gymnasium spaces for cots and for sleeping areas. You would have access to shower facilities and water and all of the locker spaces that would be provided, including handicapped accessible and family-sized shower facilities. And then the music wing would be set up to become office space and command areas for the emergency shelter in the case that we needed to open. And then the auditorium itself would be available for communications, sharing information, or in the case of an extended needed evacuation, actually entertainment when this area became needed. So all of these areas would provide extended shelter, sleeping area, the ability to feed the community, showering, powering stations, and would be our fully functioning emergency shelter. There was additional language in the referendum that spoke to energy conservation measures. There was an additional subcommittee of the building committee that was formed. Jim Axley chaired that building committee, and as we began looking at our new building, there were a number of, I just moved that instead of pointing, there were a number of possible energy-saving measures that were being explored. We were looking at solar voltaic, we were looking at geothermal, we were looking at passive heating and cooling, we were looking at thermal massing, a number of possibilities that were initially being explored. The committee and the consultants provided through Taisu Kim and Associates looked at a number of possible suites. The band that you see here shows the cost of each of these progressive suites in the red number that extends down from zero, and the projected efficiencies or cost savings that would be recognized in the gray bands that extend up. So as we looked at the the energy-saving measures, the committee also looked at what the best combination of those measures would be in the building. Ultimately, moving forward, the energy-saving measures that go into the building are a suite of measures that will provide us a building that will function at 50% of the energy use projected for a building that is designed of this size and built today. I'm trying to be very careful on how I say that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we'll use less energy than we're using today in this school. This building is larger. This building is going to involve cooling as well as heating, and energy costs are going to continue to increase. But the standard building that could be designed and built today would use X energy. Our building is going to use 1/2 X. We have worked to provide a building that is going to be significantly efficient for this community moving forward. In fact, the designs fall into such a level that we have already applied for and anticipate gaining a $600,000 grant because of the energy efficiency measures that we are designing into the building moving forward. So we are pursuing that grant. The building will have radiant heating and cooling in all of the main classroom and corridor areas, which is a much more efficient way of cooling and heating space than having perimeter heaters and blowers and trying to move the heat through the air. We will heat and cool the floor spaces of the building, and there is a lot of data that Jim Axley can talk to you in much more confidence than I can, but this is one of the measures that has been incorporated into the new building. Additionally, and this is one that I'm particularly excited about, is the building takes advantage of daylight harvesting. There is a significant amount of glass in this building. We have tried to maximize the presence of natural light whenever possible, and in fact, the lights in the classrooms are essentially smart lights. If you walk into the high school and turn on the switch at 6 in the morning, there will be very little light coming in from the windows, and so the classroom will light up as much as it needs to get to the level of light that is appropriate. And over the course of the day, as the sun comes up, from 6 o'clock to noon, the actual light that the fixtures are putting out will dim over the course of the day. We will not walk into the building at noontime and say it's a little dark in here and throw on the lights and light every ballast to 100% to get us that little extra light that we need. So the building will recognize how bright the rooms are and will only provide the amount of lighting necessary to go from where we are to where we want to be. So the lighting will be smart and it will save energy in that way moving forward. We are also taking advantage of increased insulation. This is not exciting. This is not really fun technology to talk about, but is one of our greatest savings. We are investing in the envelope of the building. We're looking at glazings on glass. We're looking at insulation ratings in the walls, the floors, and the ceilings, and we're ensuring that the building will stay cool longer in the summer and remain warm longer so that we're not coming back in 20 years and having to replace all of the glass and all of the insulation. It's not exciting, but it works. We are also taking advantage of micro-turbine technology. Essentially, if we have to run a motor during the school day to heat water or to move mechanics, we're taking advantage of the waste heat that is produced and turning that back into the system. And then Tecogen generation. And John, I was going to ask if you are any better at describing what Tecogen than I am.
Well, it kind of describes it here. Basically, all you're doing is using natural gas, which is relatively cheap to generate electricity for the building, as opposed to actually purchasing electricity. But what's nice about it, it actually uses a little of the waste heat to then go heat those floors that you're talking about and go heat some of the other areas during the wintertime. That's basically what it does. So it's recapturing some of the heat from the electric generation.
So how much electrical, is it going to be off the grid as far as the natural gas providing the power? Is that the idea?
It won't be off the grid, but we are going to try to take advantage of the waste heat that's generated. So you're trying to capitalize on bringing that in. The building will be smart. The building will adjust to peak demand. The building will adjust to what we're taking in. But no, we will not achieve getting off the grid.
A good example is during the summertime, you're not going to have the whole place lit up. So you're not going to need enough that much electricity. You're not going to need that much heat energy as well. So how do you size this thing in order to make it efficient? You don't put it at 100% of your peak capacity. You put it somewhere where you're kind of optimizing it over the entire year based upon assumptions.
The direction that the committee was going in was trying to maximize the additional dollars that were put into the project through the referendum to get the greatest savings. But we didn't then overspend to go deeper. It is important to note that this project does not have a geothermal field, which I think is something that a lot of people assumed we would have, and I think a number of members of the committee assumed we were going to have geo. But when it was priced out and projected over the life of the building, this suite of more modest investments returned a greater return. The size of our building made geo very challenging. To use a geo field for a building of this magnitude would have required in the order of 200 wells being drilled. The building was sort of oversized to make that something that was going to really be cost effective. We're taking limited advantage of solar voltaics in this suite. There is a limited but not a huge suite of those components. In fact, much of our ceiling is monitored so that we're bringing in the natural light into the building rather than trying to harvest that light on the ceiling into the solar systems.
And the reasons for that are things like if you took a building today and you wanted to put solar on it, you don't have a TECOGEN combustion engine generating your electricity, so that makes more sense maybe to retrofit a building. But when you're designing new buildings, some of the newer technologies and efficiencies associated with the technologies give you actually better returns and better bang for your buck than some of the newer, renewable energies. Okay, and they'll actually use less capital initially, and they're even they're getting to the point where they're pretty clean and green. So
we explored a number of really exciting options. One of the items that was looked at would have been the entire south-facing wall of the gymnasium being finished in an enormous perforated copper sheet that would heat up in the sun and have water circulating behind it that would then be drawn in. And the passive solar component there was really exciting. We priced it out, and it wasn't something, again, that for the investment gave the return. We looked at what were called solar tubes, or often described as a labyrinth beneath the building, where we would have looked at drawing air in through a series of cement ducts that ran underneath the building, so that when you drew the air through those ducts, it would have been cooled in the summer and it would have been warmed in the winter. And again, it was a really exciting technology. We spent a lot of time pursuing it, and with the size of the building and the size of the labyrinth we would have needed, we ended up letting some of those options go. So some of the early favorites that we thought were going to pan out sort of fell off for what appear to be more modest components, but get us a much better return. Our building will meet LEED Silver standards. Again, our building will run at half the energy usage of just an average building if we were just throwing up an average school today.
Well, some of the reasons these other technologies work in today's day and age is because there's lots of governmental rebates and tax credits. We don't seem to get many tax credits. So because of that, these things just don't look as attractive for municipal buildings.
I was at a couple of meetings where they were talking about this, and it was, I thought the discussion was a great discussion. In the abstract, some of these things that we've been talking about, like geothermal, are great. But if it costs more money to do it than these less expensive alternatives to save the same amount of energy, we should go with the cheaper alternatives. I thought their discussion and their decision-making process was really very
it's really hard. Say today all of a sudden you came up with something that's cost you $500,000, but it's going to save you $1 million. Well, there's no $500,000 in the budget to spend on that to save the $1 million. So what do? There is no flexibility in the overall budget. So you might be potentially leaving something on the table. I think these guys did a really nice job in balancing all that stuff out.
They worked very hard.
And they collaborated, and I apologize for missing the name, but there is an existing committee in town, the Energy Task Force. The efficiency subcommittee of the building committee collaborated with the Energy Task Force in town. The Kohler Ronan, the consultants that were brought in from the architectural firm, I just think were simply brilliant. They were some really exciting and interesting conversations as we worked through. I want to circle back and sort of close this overview portion by saying, through all of this process and all of the really engaged community conversation that took place. There was a lot of discussion about what would be in the project, what could be enhanced in the project. Could we add the 6 feet to the additional indoor auxiliary gym? Could we increase seating in the theater? Could we add the additional rehearsal space? There was a lot of really rigorous conversation that took place around the design. And at no point, at no single meeting during any of that conversation, did the suggestion come up that we just take 8 or 10 or 12 feet out of every classroom and combine all of that up and put that into one of these other areas. They may have received a little conversation during some of the big meetings in the process, but those classroom pods remain the heart and soul of this building. And we have classroom spaces that are going to be bright, that are going to be well lit with natural light, that are going to be full of technology and Wi-Fi accessibility, that are going to open to the hallways so that you can see the learning that is happening in our classrooms, that are going to be flexible so that students can move comfortably from within a classroom to a supervised space right outside that classroom where the learning can continue. It is a building that is truly built on the principles of learning that this community has invested in for the past 6 years. I'm very excited about the design. I'm excited about the focus that we have maintained on learning and on instruction as we've gone through the design. I'll have these documents for the next 21 days for board members to come in